with Tom Orr. Tom, how's it going?
Well, Tony, we got some news this morning. It was not necessarily the news we were expecting. We were told, okay, there's going to be a press conference with Gene Smith at 9:30.
Mhm.
And so I think everyone thought, okay, great, we're going to talk about conference realignment and NIL and such and such. And then right before it started, I turned around and I looked, and the longtime SID for Ohio State men's hockey, Leanne Parker, is in the back of the room, and I'm going, I haven't seen Leanne at football stuff much, and like Kayla Hackenberg, who's on the football recruiting staff, she walks in, and Quinn Temple, the director of operations for football, and I'm like, what is going on? And then it didn't take long to figure out what was going on.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the SIDs because Gary Pettit, the
Mm-hmm.
basketball SID, was in there. I'm like, what's Gary doing here? Hey, he probably just wants to see us and hang out. And then so yeah, we kind of sort of asked for Gene Smith, or hey, it would be a good idea to get Gene Smith like earlier in the week. And Jerry Emig, the football SID, even mentioned try to have Gene for you guys. Of course, we get to talk to him every year, and there's all kinds of changes going on. So why wouldn't we talk to him now? Big Ten expansion. So we're just getting ready for that. And he's like, well, first of all, I would like to start off with an announcement. And he's like subdued, and and then he announces his retirement. And as he's talking through it and thanking everybody, then he gets to start. He has to pause for a moment before he can start talking about his appreciation for his wife Sheila. And so yeah, not what I expected this morning. I mean, at some point you knew he was going to retire, but it's not one of these things where you get the. I had no consideration once we were told we were going to talk to Gene Smith this morning that I wonder if this, maybe if it happens in, I'd say like June or something out of the blue, like, hey, Gene wants to talk to everybody. Then you're like, oh, your antennas go up. But my antennas were down the entire time until he said, I'm retiring in next June, June 30th of 2024. So
Yeah, it's an interesting time to retire because he had talked about, the sort of scuttlebutt that he was maybe thinking about it a while back. It sounds like his wife might have been in favor of him retiring a couple of years back. And then you had enough other stuff going on. You had, well, Ryan Day's
mhm.
coming in. Okay, now you've got COVID you're dealing with. Okay, you've got all this other stuff and NIL, and the world keeps changing. And June 30th, 2024 is also the last day that USC and UCLA and Oregon and Washington are members of the Pac 12. So it's not like he's ducking out at a quiet time in the sports history, but it also, I think, is if you're waiting for a time when nothing new is happening in college athletics, you're probably going to be working for the next 40 years. So he didn't sound like he was necessarily into that. It definitely did not sound like his wife was into that.
Mhm.
One of the we'll get into all sorts of stuff
Yeah.
about the future of athletics because we talked to him about that stuff as well. And I saw already the first comment on this video was wondering if Jim Tressel will be the new AD. We'll get into potentially some future candidates to keep an eye on, but I thought the funniest moment of the press conference was Bill Landis asked Gene, there was discussion about, maybe a new governing body for college football, and that's something that we've talked about. That might be the kind of thing that Gene Smith is interested in, and Gene Smith was asked, would you be interested in maybe being the college football czar that people think might need to be? And he just pointed to his wife, and his wife said, and I quote, "Hell no." So it sounds like he has been outvoted, either 2-0 or 1-1, depending on how the voting works in his household.
She gets two votes. Yeah, that was a great moment, and so many interesting things. He was asked about, are you leaving this in the hands of somebody during like a bumpy time in collegiate sports? And he said the bumps have already happened. Like the bumps happen while you are trying to bring about change or while change is happening. Now that change is here, it's like it's not smooth, but a lot of work has gone into making things happen. So it's been smoothed out in that way. So a lot of work has gone in. What was his first year? 2005.
Yeah, he came in the spring or summer of 2005, and you think about how different everything
Yeah.
is. I mean, you think about the facilities changes that they've done since then. You think about, that was early to mid Jim Tressel era, and this is years before the whole Terrell Pryor Tat 5 thing and how
Mm-hmm.
different the college football world was then. And Joe Paterno still had 6 years as head coach of, or 7 years
Mm-hmm.
of head coaches at Penn State, and all these different things. And you know, he has overseen a lot of transformation, and he talked about some of the some of the high moments, and national championship in wrestling, and multiple national championships in men's volleyball, and the women's hockey program was basically nothing, and now they have won a national championship, and they have there has been a lot, and that's someone who, I think when people hear Gene Smith's name, it doesn't take long for longtime Ohio State fans to go, ah ha ha, 2011,
Yeah.
he screwed that up, and that that was a difficult situation, and definitely one that he has pros and he has cons on his score sheet. I think by and large he has a lot more pluses than minuses. He has been a very, very influential person for a very, very long time at Ohio State, and as he said, no one is perfect, but I think he is someone who goes down in Ohio State history as a very, very positive influence on the athletic department on the whole.
Well, look at where we are. Just look around, and obviously you guys can only see us. We're surrounded by buildings that have been put up since Gene Smith got here. Whether it's Jesse Owens Stadium right over there, you got the Cavelli Center right over there, you've got the tennis center, field hockey, like lacrosse rather. Mm-hmm. So it's like there's just this extension of the WAC, like everything that has gone up since he's gotten here, and this is just in this little stretch of land. And so but you mentioned in 2011 he was asked about his regrets, and that was the first thing he mentioned. 2011 said that year, the year from hell basically, and having to deal with that, and the negative effect that the hurt that fans, players, coaches, everybody went through. That was not easy. It was asked about 2018, and he kind of alluded to things he would have done differently now with Urban and the Zach Smith thing. And so I think it was Bill Rabinowitz with the Dispatch was like, well, so like what? He's like, well, I don't want to talk about that. I don't, like I think he said like every administrator, every athletic director would have, almost everybody would have things that they would do differently. Although maybe you do have some perfect ones out there who would never change anything. But yeah, you do this long enough, you have some things you'd like to do over, but you have the information at that time, you move forward. But overwhelmingly, the 2011, that's not going to be the lasting legacy, I think, by any stretch. And the other legacy that he will leave behind is one that is very near and dear to his heart: the legacy of diversity in athletics administration. Saw some names pop up on there in terms of the hiring that he has done, and the athletic directors. We talk about coaching trees. He's got an athletic director tree under him that may be where the next Ohio State athletic director comes from.
Yeah, and as we said, the first question on there was about Jim Tressel. Jim Tressel just retired as Youngstown State's president. I think Jim Tressel is probably not looking for a new job. I think Jim Tressel is ready to ride off into the sunset, and that's so. I would not expect him to be the name. Some of the names that you sort of immediately think of, okay, who are the people with Ohio State ties? Because he was asked about, does someone have to kind of have the Ohio State ties to kind of understand some of the unique situations at Ohio State? And he didn't say definitively yes, but maybe. And, he came in with no Ohio State ties. He went to college at Notre Dame. He was an athletic director at, there were 4 places, I think. It was like Eastern Michigan, Arizona State, and 1 or 2 others. But he came in with that Ohio State ties. Some of the people from that athletic director tree that he has, he has Pat Chun, who's at Washington State right now, Heather Lyke, who's at Pitt right now, Diana Sabo, who had been with Ohio State for a long time, took a job with the Big Ten Conference a couple of years ago, and then just literally yesterday took a job as the athletic director at Utah State. So she's an interesting one. And Martin Germain, who's the athletic director at UCLA. Ben Jay is another guy who had worked under Gene Smith, who has been an athletic director in the past. He was at Hawaii and I think Houston, and he is now the CFO of the Big West Conference. Those are 5 names who I think everyone is going to kind of throw out there as people with Ohio State ties. I don't know that those are necessarily, I don't think that's an exclusive list of the people who are going to be discussed, but those are people who are at least probably going to get a look. As I saw someone mention Urban Meyer, I would not expect Urban Meyer to be the athletic director at Ohio State, given the end of his tenure at Ohio State and then the Jaguars thing. I think there is a time when you could have potentially seen that. I do feel like the athletic director business on the whole you're kind of out of the good old boys Southern, the former Southern baseball coach who then becomes the AD at that school. Like it was, that's
an old
that's sort of the old way, and it's with the way the college sports has changed, I don't think that model is necessarily going to be what you see moving forward.
no, and I even wonder. Gene Smith didn't have any Ohio State background. With Ohio State as big as it is now and the business that it is, although throughout all of this, Gene Smith said it's always been a business. I do wonder if you have to know something, or some of the people around Ohio State, I would think, but also, or do you come from a similar place? Mm-hmm. Can you come from a smaller place? I don't know. I think you have to come from the kind of experience where you have dealt with a program or university of similar size, but it will be interesting to see how they go, and whether you come from a smaller place but you have the Ohio State background, or you come from a bigger place without the background but you've dealt with donors, big time donors, and board of trustees, and shadow presidents and things like that, as Ohio State still waits for their president, and there won't be a process moving to find his replacement until the president has been appointed or named, or however it is decided at Ohio State.
Yeah, this is a very weird time for Ohio State because your athletic director is leaving, your president is leaving. Like the football conference just had a new, brought on a new commissioner. It's like at every possible level here, you're seeing changes in a pretty tumultuous time during, in college athletics on the whole, and in the Big Ten in particular. And so that's all interesting. I'm in addition to the hiring board for a new athletic director, I think people are probably also a little interested in, okay, so what does this mean for the future of coaches at Ohio State?
Yeah.
Ryan Day, Gene Smith has been a huge supporter of Ryan Day. Just gave him a big contract extension a year ago. Gene Smith just gave Chris Holtmann a big contract extension a year ago. You get, there's always the idea that the new person is going to want to bring in his or her own people. I certainly don't think Ryan Day is in any danger of, losing his job anytime soon. It's interesting in Chris Holtmann with the basketball program, because there was some scuttlebutt that is he in danger after one bad season last year? No. Does this change the calculus with Chris Holtmann? Potentially. We'll see how this season goes. They're bringing in some real talented young players. It may go completely fine, and this is all a moot point. But that's a whole separate conversation. But what does this look like? And if the person's coming in June 2024, you're not making a change immediately. So this is probably not a person who's making any kind of decision until you've played 2 more football seasons, 2 more basketball seasons, whatever. So that's kind of a just sort of look down the road, but that's another kind of angle to this that I'm sure people are wondering about.
Although Thad Matta was fired in June.
He was, and
I'm not expecting that.
I am not expecting that either. I think you may have a it's either a very clear definitive thing this year, or you might wait another year, because Holtmann just got a big contract extension. Ryan Day, he got a big contract extension. I don't think either of those are imminent in any way.
And he did say he will miss working with Ryan Day. Mm-hmm. He said his quote was, "He's the real deal."
Yeah.
So let's talk about football then, because as Gene Smith is announcing his retirement, basically saying, "Don't worry, I'll let you. I know you came here to talk about realignment and all that expansion, so we'll get to that." Dan Hope from 11 Warriors asked him a question about football being separate. I asked him a question about Chip Kelly saying football should be separate, and he is in favor of separating football out from everything else. It's just, how do you do it is the real issue. But I don't think he's alone in that, in wanting to separate things, because he kept saying football is different, and things aren't getting any smaller, so it should be separate. I really feel like, and we've talked about this for 2 or 3 or 4 years now, like this will eventually get to that point. I do feel like it's a more definitive thing now, that more people will get on board with it. It's just a matter of how that board shakes out, and getting, as I told him, like, can you herd those cats? And that's going to be the difficult part of it. But I do wonder if this next round of like TV contracts, if they don't start to maybe set up the same year in terms of ending, like the SEC will end in 20 whatever, and the Big Ten will do that same thing. But it takes so much coordination just between the conferences to be like, okay, we're going to basically get rid of our bargaining chip by getting to the table before you. We'll get to the table at the same time and we'll negotiate together. But as Gene Smith also said, I trust Greg Sankey and Tony Petitti to get this, like to be able to get things done with this whole thing. And it's just funny that he mentioned those two guys as the power couple in this situation.
Question: New alliance? Question mark.
Yeah, well, there you go.
To answer one question that I've seen a couple times, yes, we are talking to Ryan Day today. That is going to happen at 11:30, which means it's either going to happen at 11:10 or 11:50. So we'll probably have to. We have a relatively hard out here, not that long after the top of the hour, but we'll have more Ryan Day stuff later. The idea of breaking off football as its own entity makes a lot of sense. It's something we've talked about in the past. It's something that Gene Smith has talked about in the past, and it is, not a new idea. But when you look at the complaints from the softball players, for example, at the University of Oregon, about the amount of travel they're going to have to do, and hey, our parents can't come to our games anymore because they're going to be playing at Rutgers instead of at Washington State. ESPN, Fox, they don't care about softball. They don't care about field hockey. They don't care about men's volleyball. This is a football and, to a much smaller extent, men's basketball decision. So it would make some sense to keep those sports regional.
Yep.
So that then the parents of the softball player in Eugene, Oregon, whose parents live in Portland, can just drive up to Washington State or down to Corvallis in Oregon State, and you maintain some of those historical rivalries. You think about all the rivalries that have been gone since the start of this realignment thing. Missouri, Kansas, the border war. Pitt, West Virginia, the backyard brawl. Texas A&M, which is now coming back. But now the Civil War, the Apple Cup, all of these things are going, and it's kind of like for what? Why are we doing this? And these are rivalries in other sports as well. Like Ohio State soccer wants to beat Michigan soccer just as bad as Ohio State football wants to beat Michigan football. It's true in softball, it's true in baseball, it's true in everything. So you have all these rivalries, these regional rivalries, and there's been a lot of conversation about the regional feel of college sports and how we're kind of losing that, and how that was one of the things that made it special. If TV doesn't care, then maybe that's something that's going to be able to be salvaged. And then the question is, okay, if you have 64 teams, like Chip Kelly said, are the 64 teams really going to be together, or are we going to have what we've talked about at some point, 2 days ago, 1 day ago, where does Purdue and Minnesota and Mississippi State and Rutgers, do they sort of get shoved off, and then there's one college football super conference that's like a true super conference and not just the Big Ten and the SEC plus some other teams?
Yeah, I think what we eventually need to do is just sit down and, whether it's on a show or whatever, have like a 64 team draft. Like, who are the 64 programs that would want to be in? And is this something you have to opt in? And then if you do, you need to invest. And so we mentioned Chip Kelly, if you haven't seen it, he just said earlier this week or last week, his suggestion was just to have whatever the number of top football programs there are, just do what Notre Dame has done. Be in a conference for everything else. Be independent in football. And then if you have this collective number of independent teams, you're essentially one conference. I do think that would also then allow them to go back to being regionalized. Because if everybody's getting the same number, where same amount of money, you can keep your teams out west. You can keep your teams in the Midwest. And I know that football is driving everything, but do the other sports need to be in the same car? It's like if football is a truck driver, they're going coast to coast. You don't need the kids and the wife or the husband in the cab with you. Like, they could stay home and let them just live their lives while the trucker makes the money. So I think it will take some time, and maybe the way things move now, and that's something else that Gene Smith said, everything moves so much faster now. Maybe this will be one of those things where it looks like it can't happen until 2037. but it actually happens with the next round of contracts where things, we do this spread out thing all across the nation, but then it goes back to being more regional because you've taken football out of the picture. And Mike DeCourcy from Sporting News, I was in a tweet, Bill Bender retweeted something, retweeted my Chip Kelly thing, and Mike DeCourcy's like, well, who's paying for this? It's like, well, the TV networks would pay for this once everybody comes. The easy part of getting everybody to come together and agree that yes, will negotiate as a group, and that's how you kind of have to keep it even, or else you're just eventually going to face the same thing where the 64 teams will break off into 48 because the 48 can get more money. So there's going to be changes. I am interested to see how quickly things get greased because, as Gene Smith said, things are moving much faster than they ever have. So who knows, what feels like 12 years may only be 7 and once the Big Ten's contract is up or the SEC's contract is up.
Yeah, and we've talked about Oregon and Washington and coming to the Big Ten, and based on everything that people were saying a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks, 4 weeks ago, the Big Ten had sort of looked at and then passed on Oregon and Washington as potential immediate additions. Well, then the world changed. And when the Pac-12 blows up and you've got the Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, Utah going to the Big 12, well, now the situation has changed, and Oregon and Washington are coming to the Big Ten, and a number that they said no to earlier is now all of a sudden a number that becomes acceptable because, well, now the other option is not so good. So you never know when things are going to change like that, and things are changing fast.
Well, Gene even said Fox came to the table with more money.
Yes, and
the Pac-12 money that they no longer needed to spend now becomes.
Yeah, so that's an important point. The Big Ten is basically getting Oregon and Washington for free. None of the schools are losing any money out of it. Fox is just bringing more money to the table to pay the very small amount that they're giving to Utah and Washington through the end of this contract, and then they'll get cut in at the full rate whenever there's another contract. But it is that's a good example of how quickly things are changing. I do tend to still think that, we talked about getting the conference stuff to align. I know there's been a lot of scuttlebutt about Florida State. I know there are Florida State Board of Trustees people who want to walk away from that deal. They still have a grant of rights through 2036, and until I see someone who actually does walk away from a grant of rights and not have to write an absolutely ungodly big check, I will believe it when I see it. There has been some talk about like private equity with Florida State, and I'm just picturing like a leveraged buyout of Florida State athletics, and sure, you have some real off the board kind of black swan stuff that you could have happen, but I will believe the ACC goes under any kind of realistic current model of athletics administration. That doesn't seem real likely to me. Real quick, while we're pausing here for a second, if you are watching, hit that thumbs up. That will help us help this video reach more folks. We appreciate that. If you're enjoying that, make sure you're also subscribed to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. Hit that bell. Make sure you're subscribed, because that way you get notified when we do live shows like this, when
stuff like this happens.
Stuff like this happens, or
all
stuff like football games happen, which are going to happen pretty soon.
Yeah. Do we have any questions that we need to address?
Well, I've seen a couple other folks mention Jim Tressel and Urban Meyer. We talked about them a little earlier. Jim Tressel just retired as Youngstown State's university president. I don't think he's looking for a new job. And Urban Meyer, with the end of his time at Ohio State, with how the Jacksonville Jaguars thing went, I don't think that Urban Meyer is working on TV right now, and working on TV is a very, very different thing from working where you have to go meet with people constantly and fundraise and all that kind of stuff.
And not just for football.
Not just for football. You've got to go. I mean, Gene Smith talked about all the stuff he does. I have gone to men's tennis matches and seen Gene Smith there. I have gone to women's hockey games and seen Gene Smith there. I have seen, you see Gene Smith at lacrosse games. You see Gene Smith everywhere, and Gene Smith knows everyone. Gene Smith is at the tennis matches cheering for the players by name. And there are 1,000 other sports. Ohio State has a real good pistol team. I have never been to a pistol match, but I'm going to guess Gene Smith has. And you've got to. There's a lot of glad handing of donors. That's only more true in the NIL era. Fundraising, where you're fundraising for your facilities, you're fundraising for your general operations, you're all that kind of stuff. That requires a specific kind of person. I don't think that's where Urban is. Real quick, let's talk about Gene Smith's views on players as employees, because it does feel like that's sort of where things are trending in a lot of people's minds right now, that at some point the athletes, at least in some of the major sport, the revenue sports, become employees of the school. It did not sound like that was something that Gene Smith viewed as something that he would support.
Yeah, he said that would completely change the relationship, change the equation. He is through through the last 10 years or so, as we've been trying to progress and get through to the NIL. I think I remember, like in 2018 of October, he was talking about NIL and that it would be a good thing and they need to go forward with it. It only took 3 years from there to really make it happen. The idea that just cutting a check to a player, he was not for. He's totally for providing as much as you can for players, for student athletes, and whatever it takes to do that, he is for. But he wants it tied to the educational aspect of being at the university. And he mentioned the circle of care that student athletes have here, how every single student athlete has 9 people that they can go to, whether it's physically, mentally, coaches, nutrition. Like, there's somebody that you can go to if you need help, if you want something, if you need something. That the money that is invested, and again, I say, look around here. We've been sometimes we get fed here when we're here for like wrestlers or whatever, and there's a pretty decent spread that is full-time chefs and breakfast, lunch, and dinner for whatever you need, and full-time mental health professionals. I was telling somebody yesterday that the money that they spend on just like the lead mental professional is probably the same that John Cooper came in as, like $100,000 a year, so like the money that is spent is so much different than it ever has been, and not just because of cost of living, like the investments, the areas of investment are much different and much broader, and so like the expense, he mentioned Marvin Harrison, the expense going in there.
Yeah, I mean the expense of all the stuff that you have to do to prepare people, feed people, train people, all that stuff. This is all expensive stuff, and they're paying. Mickey Marotti's making a lot of money. Mark Pantoni, who's in charge of bringing people in, he's making a decent salary. I mean, you've got all these other people who work under those people. The staffs keep growing. I was walking in today and looked up in the lobby of the Woody, and there's the quote on the wall: "You win with people." Woody Hayes, and that was true in one way in Woody's day, where it's you have to have good people around you, and the people around you are what makes you succeed. Now you win with people is kind of, you have a person for that. You've got incredible nutrition staff. Kayla Olson is the nutritionist for the football team. She has an office right up there in the dining room. They have all these people who cook. They have all the tons of food and all sorts of stuff. The strength staff it's not just like one crazy guy with a whistle who's going to be yelling at everyone. No. It's like they've got a whole detailed strength staff. They have
just the groundskeeping that keeps driving around. It's crazy that Hayden Fox was able to do this with just an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator at Minnesota State.
Well, he had Dauber. I mean, that he was really the guy who held that all together. But I mean, the building behind us, if you don't know where we are kind of around the corner from the football facility. This is a building that's attached, called the Shoemaker Center, I think. And this is all like the academic piece for the athletes. We're kind of like right across the street from the Jesse Owens Stadium right now, the soccer stadium. So it is, but you are bringing in all these different people to help people succeed. You get, the tutors and all this kind of stuff, and all that stuff costs money. And I think people look at the amount of money they bring in football and say, well, how could you possibly not have money to pay the players? They still make plenty of money, and I don't think every single locker room renovation is strictly necessary. When you look at Texas spending $10,000 per locker or whatever it was, and look at how many championships it's gotten them.
Tom Herman he got them a new locker at Texas, and then 5 years later they're doing that new locker room.
Yeah, I mean, there is a certain amount of if you've ever worked in corporate America, you know, if you've got a budget amount, you've got to spend it because otherwise you won't get it the next year. So even if you don't have it, you've got to spend it. They're not supposed to really show a profit. They're not, you know, it's a non-profit entity. So you've got to spend it. So, okay, you're spending it. But, you know, there is a lot of this that is really, you know, a lot of the staffing, the mental health piece of it and all of that, that is directly beneficial to the athletes. So, you know, that's very worthwhile spending, you know, 17th locker room renovation of the decade, maybe less so, but that's neither here nor there. It looks like we are getting close to our cutoff time where we're gonna have to run back in and talk to Ryan Day. Any closing thoughts here?
No, just a surprising day, but a guy that has Gene Smith changed a lot at Ohio State, built it up. I think he got it in good hands from Andy Geiger. You know, several university presidents that he has been working with, and you know, we'll get one more before he's out of here. But you look around and you see all of the changes that have come through here, and it's hard not to give him credit for that. Football paid for it all, but you still have to have, you know, not all of it. I mean, a lot of it's donations that they're going out and fundraising for, but pretty incredible legacy that he has to be proud of.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, we said earlier, there are always going to be people who will view him as 2011 was the unforgivable sin, and you know, I think he recognizes that was not a great year. I think that, you know, but I think also no one is going to have a perfect legacy. That's just not how it works. So, you know, everyone is always, you know, everyone is always going to do something that doesn't turn out the right way. I think he's leaving Ohio State in a much better place than he found it, and he didn't find it in a bad place, but he is leaving it as a better place than when he took over, which that's kind of all you can ask.
Yeah, and he even mentioned that one of the things he's most proud of is the way now that student athletes leave prepared for the next step. And he said that took some time to get there, but now they have gotten there. And one final thing, talking about the state of college athletics, the panic that is going on around it, he said what you really need to look at is the perspective of the athletes who are in it right now. And right now, they're being treated better than they ever have before. Yes, now some may have to travel more, but the benefits that are available to them, the professionals that are available to them, they are in a very good place right now. And so that's another thing he's proud of. So I think that will do it for us. We got to head back inside to see what Ryan Day has to say about all of this. I just hope he wasn't caught off guard. Gene Smith did mention he talked to, you know, let Greg Sankey know that he's retiring. So I wonder, this is something that Ryan Day, I assume, knew was in the works for a little bit. So we'll talk to him about that. You can follow us back here live. We'll be streaming Ryan Day as well at this channel, Buckeye Huddle, youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll see you in a little bit.